going to talk to us about sports. I don't know anything about sports except my team always loses, but I don't know anything. All right, there you go.
Extra round of applause for make up for her team always losing. Wow. All right, how you doing, Nerd Nite? It's so great to be back. When I came to Nerd Nite this past spring, I was really excited to hear that Chris and Rachel were looking for more people to talk about sports. 'Cause I fucking love sports. They've been a part of my life from the start. When I was growing up, they were just always around. I played 3 failed attempts at Little League Baseball, followed by 4 even more failed attempts at high school football. I think I sprinkled golf in there just to make my grandpa happy. He would not have been so happy if he saw how aggressively and badly I played. But they were just always on TV when I was growing up. There was football all weekend, there was a baseball game on every night during the week. It's just always been fun. Playing them, watching them, talking about them. So I was real excited when I wanted to hear people talk about it. My entire life I've been crafting the art of living the extremely healthy lifestyle that is basing my own self-worth and mood and attitude on how well my sports teams are performing. Woo! And since the Ohio State Buckeyes are 5-0, I love you all. But the Indians just missed the playoffs, so fuck you too. I also wasn't very surprised to hear that they were looking for more people to talk about sports, that it was a topic that doesn't get covered a lot. Because I think there's this idea out there that sports and nerdiness just don't quite go together. That the thing about sports is that it's just a game and there's not a lot to think about, and you don't have to be smart to enjoy it, and maybe it's better if you aren't. Well, I aim to prove to you tonight that that absolutely isn't true. You can be a huge sports fan and a huge nerd, and I know that because I live it every single day. So if you are so moved, so inclined to repeat after me, go for it. Go sports! Go sports! But don't do that. Even though it's a good idea. We got Leonard there, he's the nerd and he's the sports fan. Alright, and so the way that I hope to illustrate that tonight is I'm going to be talking about a concept, a book, and a movie, all called Moneyball. And Moneyball details the story of Billy Beane, my speech's namesake. And here he is now. Not quite, I just wanted to make sure I had the ladies' attention. Now that I do, okay. That is Brad Pitt portraying Billy Beane in the movie Moneyball. Billy Beane was the manager of the Oakland Athletics baseball team in the early 2000s. And his story is significant because he was managing what's known as a small market baseball team. They didn't have the payroll to be able to keep up with the larger market teams such as New York Yankees, the Boston Red Sox, the LA Dodgers. He couldn't just pay all of the best players to come and play for him. So he had to find an edge somehow. And he did that through statistical analysis. He took a harder look at what was generally considered a good player at the time. How can I pay someone less to bring them in here, rather like a quality over a quantity thing? And so we're going to celebrate Billy tonight. Here's what we're going to be talking about. We will look at each of the 3 American professional sports and determine what exactly are the most important statistics and how far do they go in actually predicting an outcome. So football, basketball, and baseball. We'll not be talking about hockey, I'm sorry. I am not an NHL fan myself, so I don't believe I can speak with authority on it. I do consider it a major American sport. Okay, well, I mean, but if you don't like it, hey, go to Canada. Seriously, it's right down the road. It's right there, 10 miles away. I am kidding, of course. I am sorry if you are a hockey fan. See me afterwards, I'll buy you a beer. Provided, of course, they have Molson over there. So then we'll look at, exactly, yeah. Exactly, so we'll look at each of the 3 sports, determine what stats are important, and then how those stats might be affected by external factors. And there's a couple different instances there. The gameplay itself can affect stats. There's the way the seasons are structured. There's an element of luck everywhere. And so then we'll use all of this and we'll determine if Billy was indeed right. Was he effective in his strategy? Did he have success with the way he analyzed stats and brought players in? So first up, we'll talk about baseball. We're going to just stay in Billy's neighborhood here. So for the completely sports illiterate among us, we'll just talk about the size of our balls to put it into perspective. So for a baseball, we're talking about 3 inches in diameter. Not very big, but quite hard. So if small but firm balls are your thing, then maybe baseball's for you. And if you want to use them to get to first base, second base, third base, you know how it goes. And eventually, of course, hitting the home run. And so when you think about baseball, what does everyone generally think about? Home runs. All right. To win games, you got to hit a lot of home runs, right? It makes sense that if you have a power hitter on your team, someone hitting a lot of home runs, you're probably going to have a lot of success. Well, tread with caution if you're using this to predict success with a baseball team, because while it is the quickest way to score, it's also the toughest. You've got to hit the ball a long way, even though it automatically gets you a run, maybe more than 1 run if there are runners on base. And no team that's ever led Major League Baseball in home runs during the regular season has gone on to win the World Series. That could be just because they didn't have Homer Simpson and Wonder Bat. I get that, maybe we're gonna get somewhere. And this is one of the things that Billy understood. So he chose to look at a stat called on-base percentage. Quite simply what that does is it measures a hitter's ability to not make an out when they come to the plate, which is the ultimate goal, to get on base somehow, through a single, a double, a triple, yes, maybe even a home run, drawing a walk, getting hit by a pitch, whatever it is. Because he noticed that to get on base, that to score runs, you have to get on base, obviously. So it's not as glamorous of a statistic as like who hits the most home runs. A single or a walk doesn't quite have that wow factor, that immediate run that gets the crowd involved, quite like a home run does. But another important thing that Billy noticed was while on-base percentage correlated to the amount of runs a player scored, what it didn't correlate with was how much that player was paid. God damn, I do that every time. And so what he sought to do was find the players with the high on-base percentage, pay them to come to his team because no one else was going to pay. All of the scouts across the league, and especially on the A's, a lot of whom disagreed with Billy, didn't think that that was a wise strategy. But he had some success with this strategy. In fact, in the year 2002, his Oakland Athletics set what was at the time the longest winning streak in Major League Baseball at 20 games in a row. And that streak would stand until 2017 when the Cleveland Indians stepped in and... And oddly enough though, here's how that streak was secured. Here's how that record was secured. The A's had won 19 games in a row, and the Kansas City Royals came to town for what was going to be the clinching game. The A's jumped out to an 11-0 lead in the 3rd inning. If you don't know much about baseball, just trust me when I tell you, that is a sick amount of runs. If you are up by 11 runs, it's almost assured that you'll win that game. But the Royals had other plans. They stormed back into that game, they got competitive, and by the 8th inning, they had tied it up at 11 runs each. Bottom of the 9th rolls around, the A's end up winning this game on, wouldn't you know it, a walk-off home run. Bottom of the 9th, there's a home run. That stat we talked about earlier, it's not quite that important. You don't need power hitters. And really you don't, because the man who hit that home run was named Scott Hatteberg. And here he is. Making sure I still had the ladies' attention. There he is, played by Chris Pratt in the movie Moneyball. Scott Hatteberg was brought to the A's. Billy really liked him because he had a high on-base percentage. Even though he had had problems with injuries, he was a catcher, but they brought him onto the A's to play first base, even though he had to learn how to field all over again. Billy didn't care because he said, I want him because he can get on base. He can score runs. And so wouldn't you know it, that would end up being the guy who sent the A's into history. So on the left, we have Chris Pratt portraying Scott Hatteberg, and on the right, we have the real Scott Hatteberg, watching his ball sail over the fence and sending himself and his manager and the A's into baseball history. Reminding you again, until the Indians came along. Up next, the National Football League, the NFL. So now, our balls aren't quite as hard, but they're bigger and more oddly shaped. A few of you are feeling that. So what's important in the NFL? What do you got to do to win NFL games? What do the experts and the fans consider to be important stats? One that you hear talked about a lot is something called the turnover battle, or the turnover margin. Everyone says that you have to turn the ball over fewer times than your opponent in order to be successful. Again, for the football illiterate, quite simply what this means is you relinquish possession to the other team. Offense is moving the ball. If at any point during the play, the defense is in possession, it switches, and that's a turnover. It can be a pretty good indicator as far as analyzing performance. As you can see, the team that wins the turnover battle usually goes on to win the game 78% of the time. Pretty good odds, more than 3/4. But the thing to think about with turnovers is a lot comes into play here. It's not just a straightforward stat, there's a lot to think about. Is it that a good team creates turnovers, or that a bad team just doesn't take care of the ball? A lot of turnovers are luck. Sometimes you can have someone who's doing everything right. They're carrying the football, they've got it secured, defensive player gets in there just right, the one place you can't put it, ball comes flying out, flies across the field, and again, since we know our balls are oddly shaped, it's going to hit the ground and who knows where it's going to bounce. Who knows who's going to be there to follow? Is it a bunch of offensive players who can fall out harmlessly? No turnover happens. Is there a defensive guy there who can get the turnover, who can maybe run it in for points for his own team? What could happen? Also, the turnover margin, was it 1-0? Was it 5-0? 7-6? Just a big old fucking comedy of errors? So there's lots to think about here. So while you could use this to predict success, be careful. And for a good example of this, we're going to talk about a completely hypothetical Super Bowl situation. Let's say we have a team called the Tacoma Seabirds. And they are playing a team called the Massachusetts Colonials. That sounds good. And so let's say we have a quarterback named Marshall Hinton, and he moves the team down to the 1-yard line of the Colonials with less than a minute to play. To this point, the Seabirds have turned the ball over fewer times than the Colonials. The only thing that has to happen is to move the ball forward 1 yard. Also with a running back named Marshall Hitch. And the Seabirds win because they're down by 4 points. They become the Super Bowl champions. Instead, this is what happened. An interception was thrown, the Colonials got the possession, they ran out the clock, and they became the Super Bowl champions despite having lost the turnover battle in the game. The circumstances surrounding this are what dictate that. It is the fact of when it happened, where it happened, the intensity of the moment, and all that. So it's proof that there's a lot more to think about when it comes to turnovers. I will again remind you this situation was completely hypothetical. So now we have who's got the biggest balls of them all. The National Basketball Association, the NBA. Unless you're Kevin Durant. So what's important in basketball? What do you got to do to win games and to be successful in the NBA? The one that everyone talks about these days, the one that's so obvious, is three-pointers. You got to be able to shoot the three-point shot. Ever since 1970, when the NBA initiated the three-point line, teams have been figuring out ways to use it to be a lot more successful. Good teams tend to shoot three effectively. Why not? Because it's worth more points. And the difference between a three-point and a two-point shot could literally be just an inch. I don't care. If you're behind the line, it's 3 points. You're in front of it, it's 2. The Golden State Warriors have built an absolute dynasty largely around shooting the three-point shot in the past half-decade. And the Houston Rockets out west are the only team that's ever really given them a run for it in the Western Conference. And they shoot threes like a machine. Yeah, he knows what I'm talking about. Rachel looks a little too excited. You might have to get a hold of me. He's like, yeah, baby, grab my beard and call me James Harden. So it's a pretty good indicator, as the stats would show. 8 out of the top 10 teams in three-point differential since 2010 have gone on to make the NBA playoffs. Put another way, what that means is, if you shoot more threes than your opponent, you've got an 80% chance to make the playoffs. But we're talking about the NBA playoffs, where half of the league makes it to the postseason, the entire thing is a goddamn marathon, and we still don't know if it's actually over yet. But again, be careful. If you are trying to say the team that shoots more threes is always more successful. For a good example of that, let's look at the team that currently has the record for most three-pointers made in an NBA regular season. Not coincidentally, that team is also the one that has the record for most wins in an NBA season, at 73. And I am talking about the 2016 aforementioned Golden State Warriors. They made the playoffs, they blazed their way through the playoffs, they had a 3-1 lead in the NBA Finals, needing one more win to cap off the best season in NBA history, but then something happened. That happened, and this happened. The Cleveland Cavaliers happened. They stormed back from 3-1 down, and those there are the final moments of them snapping the city of Cleveland's 52-year professional sports title drought and proving that there's a little more to basketball than just three-pointers. What a night that was. I will always remember it for how big of a night it was, but also because it was Father's Day. My father and I each did, well, some pretty crazy shit that night for another forum, but and I know he's gonna watch the video of this, so hey, for the 52nd or maybe 2016's time, Dad, watch the game again, fuck it. All right, so we've talked about what stats are generally important in each of these sports. Now, how are these stats affected? What's actually going on that actually produces these numbers? We can look at this on a bit of a scale of varying chaos, or sanity, if we will, when it comes to each of the sports. So going back to Billy's sport, baseball, we don't have a whole lot of chaos actually going on the field. Each play starts the very same way, with a pitch. There's no time, and there's very little, if any, physical interaction between the players on the field. Save for maybe the pitch to the batter. They're actually trying to hit the ball thrown at it. Essentially, a ball is hit, it's fielded, you throw it to whichever base you're going for, and there it is, plays over. So when you're looking at a player's individual stats, they're a pretty solid indication of the talent level of that player. They're not affected much by everyone else who's out there on the field, and this is one thing that Billy understood. Now, if we look at football, now we're up in the chaos a little bit. Looking at a bit of controlled chaos here, because while it is pretty much a 22-man square dance out there, a bunch of people running into each other, the very objective of it is to disrupt the path of your opponent, the people around you. What that means is that the stats and the actions of an individual player are going to be heavily affected by the actions and stats of 21 other people. So it becomes a little more tricky to actually look at a player's stats and determine if those are a reflection of them. Determine just how good they are. And then we move on to basketball, and it's just mass chaos. Now, we don't have any regular stoppages of play, whereas in football, still each play started the same. There's the controlled chaos. In basketball, we're not stopping. A different person gets the ball to start the possession. People are running into each other, even though it's not a contact sport, so it becomes even harder to actually look at a player's stats and determine how good they are, because it's going to be heavily affected, again, by many other people around. So there's one element of variance when it comes to looking at stats, and another one is in the way the seasons are actually structured. Here's the amount of regular season games in each sport. We've got 16 for the NFL, 82 for the NBA, and 162 in Major League Baseball. So looking at that, it's natural that we're going to have a degree of variance and success from year to year, because we have a much bigger sample size in baseball and basketball versus football. We look at this as data points. We can have a particularly good day, we can have a bad day next, we can have an average day next. The more opportunities we have to vary those data points, the more it will level out. So for an example of this, the NFL with a 16-game season, for 15 out of the past 16 seasons, they have had a team go from worst to first in their division. In other words, they finish the league at the bottom of their division, they go on to win it the following year. That happens far less often in basketball and baseball because of the sample size. In fact, to my knowledge, it's never happened in the NBA. I mean, divisions are pointless in the NBA anyway, so nothing matters. But just illustrating it, because when you can have a good team that has a bad day, you can have a bad team that has a good day. Over time, the more talented team will generally emerge. So in baseball and basketball, it's a little more difficult to have that team that gets a couple of good breaks, they put a talented team on the field, and they make a playoff run. Because more chances to succeed are also more chances to fuck up. So, and this is just the regular season. Moving on to the postseason, we have some variance also. In each sport, the playoffs are a single elimination bracket, but in football, it's one game at a time, whereas in basketball and baseball, it's decided by series, either best of 5 or best of 7. So again, more data points, less chances for a bad break or a good break to ruin or make a series, and so the more talented team will generally emerge. And these good and the bad breaks that I'm talking about, it's underpinning everything that happens in sports, and all boils down to good old-fashioned dumb luck. Angela, he was sometimes good luck, right? But the fact is that sports are played on planet Earth by human beings. Human beings are imperfect. They make mistakes. They have good days. They have bad days. They get sick. Sometimes crazy stuff just happens and you don't draw the team that would have been a good matchup for you and instead face a worse one. I think my favorite story of just a freak event affecting the outcome of a game and a season and actually a franchise happened in 2007. It was Game 2 of the American League Divisional Series playoffs between the Cleveland Indians and the New York Yankees. This game is commonly known as the bug game. And there's why. A couple of shots from the game there. Game was played in Cleveland, and at the bottom of the 8th inning, all of a sudden a huge swarm of this small mosquito-like bug named midges came flying in off Lake Erie and just took over the place. They were everywhere. The bottom of the 8th inning, Indians are up 2-1. Pitcher Jabba Chamberlain is on the mound. These bugs come in out of nowhere, they're all over his head, they're all over his face, and here's what happens, he throws a wild pitch, which is a pitch that goes past the catcher, so it's live ball, anyone on base can advance. And Indian center fielder Grady Sizemore stole home, tied the game at 2. It would eventually go to extra innings, the Indians would win, they would go on to win the series, and Joe Torre, Yankees manager, would end up losing his job. Now thinking about that wild pitch, Jabba Chamberlain had thrown one wild pitch the entire season up to that point. In the bottom of the 8th inning, he threw 2. So I think it can be argued those bugs distracted him a little bit. And so that led to years later, the saying goes in New York that bugs altered the course of New York Yankees history. Sometimes crazy shit just happens. So was Billy right? Underpinning this entire thing, based on what we've talked about. As we discussed, there's varying levels. The games are played differently. There's going to be variance in how the stats are analyzed. So he had success using his strategy. So we'll say that yes, he was right. But we'll say that also no, he was not. Because while he had success, he made playoff runs, he had solid teams, he had the record for longest win streak for a while, he never accomplished his one ultimate goal of winning a World Series while he was with the Oakland. So could he then have moved on? Could he have tried out football? Could he have tried out basketball? See if he had success with that strategy there? Again, maybe, maybe not. But based on what we've talked about, stats are used a lot differently in those two sports. There's a lot more of that intangible element to it, based on what's going on the court, and the way the seasons are set up and all that. And of course, behind the scenes of all this, there's just that plain dumb luck factor. But that's not affecting what we think of Billy, because luck just happens all the time. The bottom line of all this is that they all play a role in determining who wins in sports, determining who's successful. We've got the stats, we've got the wow factor, we've got the luck, we've got all that. So it means that we can look forward to spending many, many more years talking about, arguing over, and killing brain cells over which group of people wearing a certain color uniform is better than another group of people wearing this other color uniform. But you know what? I think that's a good thing. Because at the end of the day, this really is just a game. We're not out there killing each other, anything like that. And we're motivated, at least I'm motivated, by the accomplishments of these athletes and what they're able to accomplish. They're role models. As cheesy as it sounds, that 2016 Cavaliers title led me and some other people close to me to make some pretty significant changes and improvements in our own lives. Because I looked at that team and I said, if they can accomplish that, then what the fuck am I scared of? What can't I get out there and accomplish? So I can stand here today and I can trace a certain amount of happiness back to that 2016 team. Now, just how much, I don't know, because for that I need to do a hell of a lot more statistical analysis than I do to do amount of time. Thank you very much, Nerd Nite.
Okay, Q&A. Anybody got a question for Mike? Sports question.
Question that was asked is, what's the difference between on-base percentage and a batting average? Yeah, the ability to not make an out. So batting average looks strictly at a hit. So that would be a single, double, triple, or home run. And it doesn't factor in fact, a walk, getting to base with 4 balls, by getting thrown 4 balls. So those aren't factored in. So batting average is strictly the amount of hits someone makes versus times they're up to the plate. And on-base percentage calculates every hit. So it's a little more accurate.
Anybody else? Questions?
What are your thoughts on using random number generators to fill out brackets?
My thoughts on using random number generators to fill out brackets. Well, since I've done that a few times myself, after caving to peer pressure in the office when the NCAA poll's going around, don't do it. You'll lose a lot of money that way.
Right.
Any other? Oh, yes.
Okay, question was asked was discuss the advantages of the minor league system in baseball. Quite simply, the way Major League Baseball is structured is everyone knows what's called the Major League team, which is the big leagues. There are, I think, either 3 or 4 levels below that called the farm system. And the system, the idea, the way that system's supposed to work is you draft a player out of college and he'll spend some time in the farm system developing himself, developing talent, getting ready for the big leagues, so to speak. And I think this is a pretty decided advantage when it comes to baseball. They can be a lot more, they can take a lot more risks when it comes to who they draft out of college. They can spend years developing him and just call him up when he's ready on a night or on a season. Whereas in the NFL and the NBA, someone who's drafted at the top of the order, the first draft pick, is expected to contribute right away. And there's a huge amount of pressure for a kid coming out of college, probably not even old enough to drink yet. So I think the farm system really is an awesome thing, an awesome way that you can, I think in the end it amounts to seeing, I'm not going to say more talent, but just more developed and crisp talent on the field while watching the Major League Baseball games together too. Thank you for bringing that up.
Nope, I got some. Thank you.
How do you win at fantasy football? Well, you get really fucking lucky. Get out the random number generator. My dad's watching again. I beat him for the title 2 years ago. And it was really just pure luck. 3 games down the road, which I had a tie, I think, and then I had a tight end. I was playing a tight end who had to catch 2 passes in a night, and I was done out of the playoffs. I caught 1, and I have the trophy. So, yeah, just get lucky.
All right. Best baseball movie. Best baseball movie, not Moneyball. Best
Oh, the best baseball movie?
Yes.
Are you asking me what it is, or are you just saying the best baseball movie is
No,
Moneyball?
I'm asking you, in your opinion, which is the best baseball movie?
Oh, okay. In my opinion, what is the best baseball
Yes.
movie? I'd say Moneyball's close, but I'm gonna have to go with Major League 2. Like the second one.
Oh!
With the obvious exception of Up Your Butt, Joe Boo, so I will give you that one.
Let me tell you something that number 2 doesn't have, and that's Wesley Snipes. And I think I speak for everyone here when I say that always bet on black.
We can both agree Major League 3 sucked.
Okay.
That one had Scott Bakula.
I think we have one over here.
That was? Oh my gosh!
I don't think I've ever seen Major League 3.
So the question was, after Billy Beane and kind of what he did they change the way they did salaries? I don't think the league actually restructured how they do that, but one thing that did happen was the rest of the league eventually caught up to him. They saw what he was doing, they saw the strategy he used, and that's the problem with being innovative, is that eventually what you're doing, your creative ways are just kind of become the norm. And so the big market teams, they could bring in the talent, but they still had that extra added advantage of having a little more money. Arguably why he never actually got a World Series. Kind of a new guess.
Yes, Jane?
So, like, I've always been kind of fascinated with
Would there be a foothold for a 20-sided football? He wants really odd-shaped balls. I think that would definitely increase the randomness of turnovers because there's now a bunch more different ways that thing can bounce.
And I think it'd be a great way to get nerds more into it because it looks like a Dungeons and Dragons style.
But the National Dodecahedron League doesn't really ring as many, not quite as,
That's you!
No. All right. Anybody else? I think we got time for one more. Anyone? Well, that's it then.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it. No third speaker. Thank you guys for coming out. We will see you next month, November, first weekish of November.
Yeah, there's still more food. I'm still passing out hash browns. But that was great. I am so thankful that we got Mike to talk about sports right before he leaves us. So thank you for your final gift to Anchorage. We finally had a sports talk, and we kind of had a sports talk with Peter because it's what you do when you're out exercising. So I feel like this is a win for Nerd Nite.
I love it.
I love it.